Collins. Welcome to Writer's Reading. This program is brought to you as a public service presentation of WPRG TV5, Harold, Kentucky. Today as my special guest I have Mr. James Riley. Welcome to the show, James.
Thanks.
You want to tell us something about you, what you do, how long you've been writing, whatever you want to tell us.
I teach at Pikeville College in the English department. I'm going to read from the book I've been working on the last couple of years. It's called Southern Roulette. That's about it.
Okay, you want to read it now?
Sure. I'll give you just a preview of what's about to happen here. The book's called Southern Roulette, and it deals with this family that lives in a house in Faulkner County. The two main characters from this scene, Dixie Lee and Mason, are married. And Dixie has decided, because of certain reasons she has, that she's going to try and kill her husband. And that's what happens in this scene. Dixie Lee stood by the stairs and watched Mason sleeping on the couch. He lay stretched out on his back with one arm draped over his eyes, his face rough with the gray stubble of a weekend shadow, and his mouth sucking big gobs of air that snorted back out his nose. He smelled like beer and some Saturday night road whore. In bed the night before, Dixie had watched preaching on the television while she waited for Mason to come home. "The Lord is the solution to your problems," the preacher kept saying. "He's there in your hour of need." It occurred to Dixie that Jesus might help her out, and she did what the preacher said, got down on her knees and put her hands flat to the blue screen. "Lord," she prayed, "this is surely my hour of need." When nothing happened, she didn't mind. She didn't like bothering the Lord with problems like Mason Dixon, and besides, she'd dealt with the Lord before, and his solutions were sometimes worse than the problem itself, something to do with that mysterious ways part she'd heard so much about. She'd even tried buying the Lord's help once, mailed off $10 to a preacher over in Morrill who swore the Lord understood better than any other the power of the almighty dollar. 2 weeks later, she received a letter back saying the Lord was no cheapskate. Dixie began to suspect that Miss Eva had been right and that the Lord didn't have a solution to her particular problem. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Miss Eva said. The words echoed in Dixie's mind as she watched Mason sleep. She slipped across the room and looked out the window at the yard. Rhonda stood talking at the gate with the boy next door, his hands perched on the top wire of the fence as he bent forward and whispered in Rhonda's ear. Dixie didn't see Sonny anywhere, but she knew he couldn't be far, probably chasing some grass mouse through the weeds or throwing a fit at the sky. The churn of Mason's snoring stopped suddenly, smacking and sucking at his lips as he shifted his weight and drifted back into drunkenness. "This is surely my hour of need," Dixie thought as she moved quietly to the buffet. She waited for the steady rhythm of Mason's breath to return before she eased open the top drawer. There, among the vacuum cleaner bags and old rook cards, lay the oilcloth with the gun wrapped inside it. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," she thought. "He moves in mysterious ways." She stood with the drawer open for a long time, the steady motion of Mason's breath growing deeper and louder until the whole house filled with the confusion and noise. She moved slowly, her hand reaching out and taking hold of the cloth, lifting it from the drawer and setting it on top of the buffet. She unfolded the cloth one corner at a time until the gun lay uncovered before her, the blue-black barrel big as her arm. She took hold of the handle and lifted it in the dim light from the window. It was heavier than she expected, weighted so the end of the barrel sagged at the floor as she turned and took a step toward the couch where Mason lay. Shadows moved along the floor at her feet, the sound of Mason snoring vibrating and constant as she held the gun out in her hands and steadied herself. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," she thought. She moved closer to where he lay, the barrel of the gun hovering above him. Her fingers eased around the trigger and tightened as she prepared to mete out her own particular brand of justice. She could put him out of her misery once and for all, she thought. She stood beside the couch, looking down the barrel of the gun and listening to the rattle of his breath. It beat against the walls, the whole room in motion around her as she tugged at the hammer with her thumbs, snapping it back once until it clicked in place and steadied, Mason's body absorbed by the shadows in the room, his face hidden beneath the curve of his arm. Dixie tightened her grip and closed her eyes. She turned her head and felt the slight give of the trigger. The Lord takes care of those, she thought. The whole house seemed to grow quiet. The motion around her stopped as if she had found her way to the center of something where even the sound of Mason's snoring seemed distant and unreal, replaced by a loud knocking that Dixie hadn't expected from a gun being fired. She stood with the gun in her hands, and the knock came again, like an echo this time, only louder. She opened her eyes and looked around the room. Mason still slept on the couch, but he seemed disturbed somehow and uneasy, his body shifting as he turned on his side. There was someone knocking on the door, a shadow moving on the porch outside the house. Dixie didn't hesitate long. She slipped the gun back in the buffet and went sneaky peeking to look out on the porch. There was a man standing with his back to the door. He raised himself up on his toes and rocked back on his heels, a carpet bag clasped behind his back in both his hands. She unlocked the door and cracked it open. The man turned facing her when he heard the lock. He had brown hair that was slicked down and parted on top, a white crease down the center of his head. When he smiled, his teeth looked slick and yellow behind his thin lips. "What?" Dixie said through the crack in the door. "Are you lost, ma'am?" the man said, nodding as if he understood something he couldn't have understood. "Is your life confused?" "I don't want any," Dixie said. She glanced over her shoulder at Mason, who was still unsettled on the couch. "Now go away." "I have here the solution to your problems, ma'am," he said. He patted the satchel and extended one hand toward her. "Name's Naton, Lester Naton." "You don't understand," Dixie said. "I'm not interested." "Not interested," Lester said. His hand hovered out before her. "Am I hearing you correctly, ma'am?" "I think you are," Dixie said. "No thanks." She started to close the door, but it caught and stopped on the toe of his leather shoe. "What I have for you this morning," he said, "is knowledge, pure and simple. Now that's something everybody's interested in. Wouldn't you agree?" "No," Dixie said, "I wouldn't." She pushed at the door, but it wouldn't budge. "Surely it's not going to kill you just to talk with me," he said. "Just give me a minute of your time. Hear me out. And if it doesn't interest you, I'll be on my way." Mason said behind her. It was then Dixie realized she'd left the oilcloth on top of the buffet. In the rush and confusion, she put the gun back in the drawer, but she hadn't wrapped it. She hadn't even uncocked the hammer. "You don't understand," she said. "My husband is home." "Oh," Lester said with a slow and meaningful smile. "I see." "No," Dixie said, "that's not what I meant." "Dixie," Mason said from somewhere inside a drunken haze, "what is it?" "It's nothing," Dixie said. "The wind under the door. Go back to sleep." In desperation, she opened the door and pushed her way out on the porch. "You don't understand," she said. "This is not a good time." "Are you afraid to open your eyes, ma'am? Are you scared of the truth?" Dixie tried to think of something to say that would discourage him, but she couldn't. There was only Mason finding the oilcloth and the gun ready to fire in the top drawer. "That's what I have for you this morning, Miss Dixie." "Well, Miss Dixie, I've come this morning with the knowledge every woman needs to survive in this modern world." "Knowledge?" Dixie said. "That would be correct, Miss Dixie. I've come to open your eyes." He took the satchel and opened it. His hand disappeared, and when it reappeared, there was a book in it with a black leather binding. "Do you know what this is?" Dixie looked at the book. "A Bible?" Lester Naton laughed. "Not hardly, Miss Dixie. I said the truth." "Please," she said, "make it fast." "This, Miss Dixie, is just one of a set of fine books that deals with any number of subjects you need to know about. Good and evil, life and death." He opened the book and turned it around. There was the picture of a woman on the page, her insides all colored and marked with black numbers. "They're encyclopedias, ma'am. New modern knowledge encyclopedias." The woman had been drawn on clear pages, and as he turned each page, the different parts of her body appeared and separated in a way Dixie never thought could happen, the white breasts vanishing as a red heart showed underneath. "Now tell the truth," Lester said. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" Dixie looked at the insides of the woman's body. They were all different colors of guts and internal organs. She'd never seen the insides of a person before. She never thought about it, but there was something interesting to her about the blue veins and arteries that ran down the woman's arms and legs. She held out her hand and pointed to a brown lump hovering somewhere inside the woman's belly. "What's that?" she said. "There's 2 of them." Lester looked over the top of the book. "Number 69, he said. He turned the book around and read the legend. "That there's an ovary, Miss Dixie. You have a good eye." "Ovary," Dixie said. She'd heard the word before, but she couldn't recall its significance exactly. That would be, Lester said, what makes a woman, if you know what I mean. I'm not sure I do, Dixie said, thinking over another word for vagina. Precisely why these books are invaluable, Lester said. I'd be happy to show you more. Dixie found herself interested in what Lester had to say, and even partly interested in Lester. But she remembered then Mason on the couch and the oilcloth lying on the buffet. I'm interested, she said. I am, but it's not a good time. I see, Lester said, and I understand completely. He closed the book and slipped it back into his carpet bag. Perhaps we can meet at a more opportune time, one that might afford us more privacy. He smiled again, and this time Dixie understood exactly what he meant, and she smiled back. Yes, she said, I think I'd like that. Then I'll be back, Lester said. You have my word on it, or my name's not Lester Nathan. He turned to leave, but stopped and looked back at her from the edge of the porch. When would be good for you? Any time, Dixie said, just not now. Yes, ma'am, he said, and he nodded with emotion that might have meant he was tipping his hat had he been wearing one. After he was gone, Dixie snuck back into the house. Mason had gotten up from the couch and gone upstairs to the bathroom. The oilcloth lay wadded up on the buffet where she'd left it. She got the gun out and uncocked the hammer, wrapped it in the cloth and put it away. As she closed the drawer, Mason came staggering back down the stairs. Was someone at the door? Dixie looked out the window at the yard. Lester was gone. Rhonda was sitting on the red coupe with Darrell, Sonny hanging at her knees. It was no one, she said, a Bible salesman. Bible salesman, Mason said. Did you tell him to get lost? I told him we already had a Bible. Good, Mason said. He opened the buffet and got his gun, stuffed it down in his belt and shook his head. What time is it? He said. I got business to tend. It's late, Dixie said. Later than you think. There you go.
I am very impressed. I like that.
Thanks.
Is the rest of the book that good? That interesting?
Oh, I don't know, maybe. I hope so.
I like it. I like it. And
It's really good.
I want to thank you for coming on the show today. This is James Riley, a professor at Pikeville College. And I want to thank Imogen June Johnson for allowing us to use her home, the York Mansion. Also, I want to thank Dr. Don and WPRG for allowing us to come to you today. Until next week, may God bless you.